All right.
When you're reading, I get lost sometimes, and you can tell me what you are.
Okay.
Because I follow and then I get lost.
Yeah. Well, I started doing this on outline style, like bullet points and numbers and stuff, and it got to be like 400 or 500 pages, and it's, so I got rid of all the little points and stuff and did it this way, but I'll try to make paragraphs or something. Maybe I should just number the paragraphs. I guess I could do that.
I think that.
Yeah, maybe that's a good idea. I'll start numbering the paragraphs. Yeah.
That would be great.
All right.
Yeah, cool. And tell me what paragraph you're in, what number you're in.
All right. Yeah, I can.
I get listening and then I lose track of.
I understand. Well, I just so you know, people, I write this to be read by you.
Yeah, I understand.
I don't really write it to be read by me, because I already read it.
No, but.
And I know how aggravating it is for me over the years going to pastors' conferences and being read to. It drives me nuts. No other profession in the world does that. We don't do it as much as we used to, and unfortunately the upgrade is not an improvement, but that's neither here nor there. But it is very aggravating to be read to, okay? It's boring, okay? So I try not to do too much of that. This is really for you. I'm going to give you, as I didn't circle stuff here because, I don't know, to me that didn't work out. So I didn't circle it here, but I'm giving you the high spots, hitting the high points, and you read later on. You can read the whole thing word by word, and then if you've got questions, you can go back. I'll tell you right now. Are we going? We're going. Okay. I'll tell you right now. I'm not going to spend more than 2 Sundays on this. Islam. Okay. I only spent 2 Sundays on Hinduism, Buddhism, because they're basically the same thing. And I'm only going to spend 2 Sundays on this at the very most, all right? If not, even that. Judaism might take 2 also, or maybe 3, but that's okay, because that's kind of a foundational something for Christianity. So that being said.
Good morning.
Hey, good to see you.
Have you done the questions?
No.
Hey, Laura, if you can check in, I'll email you the sheets.
That's cute.
All right. So, with that being said, let us proceed then with questions, comments, and considerations, conundrums, and all kinds of other tragedies and disasters that may come from the flu. Harry?
Reading that Doctrine of Mormon,
Oh,
I just can't believe it.
Well, good. I'm glad to hear that.
I can't believe people can read it.
Yeah, I know. Well, most don't know. That book is hard to come by. You can't just waltz into the Mormon Learning Center there on the highway by Target. You can't just waltz in there and get that.
But anyway,
Yeah.
Adam was present in the council of the gods before they made earth.
Right. Because Adam is the god of this world. And he was the first one to get a body. He gave himself a body.
How can they use some parts of the scripture and try and support their beliefs, and they leave the most obvious one? It's incomprehensible.
Hey, people will believe anything. Okay? If this past year, 2020, didn't convince you of that, then you were hiding under a rock.
That's your head was saying.
Really. I mean, defund the police, and well, I can't even think of them all right now, but yeah, where yeah, people will believe anything if they're hungry enough, scared enough, stupid enough, ignorant, which is a different thing, enough. Yeah, they'll believe anything. And yeah, I think you have, I don't really blame Joseph Smith. I don't blame Brigham Young. I don't blame any of those guys. I really don't. And I blame, of course, Satan, but more so, I blame the Christian church. I blame the Christian church and the heretics in the Christian church for the rise of Mormonism and Jehovah's Witness and Seventh-day Adventists and Christian Science and all the rest of them. It's the failure of preachers. It's the failure of pastors. It's the failure of theologians in the Christian church that allow for these cults to arise. If these guys would have stuck with the gospel, pure gospel, instead of becoming legalists, I won't say all of them would not have arisen, but most of them probably would not have arisen. The cults, I mean. And the same thing even is true of the denominations. We wouldn't need Lutheranism if the Roman Church had stuck with the gospel. The Roman Church had stuck with the gospel and then need Lutheranism. Wouldn't. And if the Protestant Christians had stuck with the gospel, we wouldn't need Baptists or Presbyterians or Methodists or anything else. And it's leaving the gospel. It's trying to control people through the law that has brought about all of the problems in Christianity, really in the world in general. I mean, really, it's even Adam and Eve's distrust of God, which is really distrust of His gospel ways, that brought about the fall of the sin. Yeah. So I mean, really, that's the ultimate sin, folks. Is the Christian church is responsible for its own demise. And that's what's going on today. The people are leaving the Christian church in droves. Because the Christian church, in general, major denominations, have nothing to offer anymore. They certainly don't offer the gospel. All they offer is the different kinds of rules and regulations. Used to be the rules and regulations in the past were don't drink, don't dance, don't smoke, okay? Now, the regulations in these mainline Protestant denominations is hug a tree, pick up trash, and give to the poor. If you don't do those things, you're a bum. And you're no good, and you ain't going to heaven. Put it that way, but it's different what they mean. No question about it. And so they're trying to change behavior. Just like the early ones were trying to change behavior. Stop people from drinking, stop people from smoking, stop people from dancing, from having sex, etc. And so the church come up with a whole bunch of rules to stop people from doing things. Okay? Calvin, for example, looked out into he saw the Lutherans, and he said the Lutherans ain't behaving any better than the Romans. And that's true. Well, is it the doctrine's fault? No, it's not the doctrine's fault, it's people's fault. Okay? Just because the Lutheran mayor said we need to have one whorehouse in every town, doesn't mean he's right. Okay? And so when Calvin and Zwingli and those guys cleaned up Geneva and Zurich and closed down all the cat houses and everything, they said, well, we're better than you are. And so their descendants come up with all kinds of rules. No dancing, no drinking, no smoking, no this, no that, blah, 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 whatever. You got to make a decision for Jesus and everything else. To control people. Control people. Why do Romans have purgatory? To control people. Okay? That's what it's all about. That's what everything is all about, people. Okay? That's what politics is all about. That's what religion is all about. That's what everything is all about. Control. That's what Islam is all about. Control. That's what Judaism will be all. You see that when I present it. It's all about control. I am not interested in controlling your life. I am interested in God controlling your life. And the only way God's going to do that is if you believe the gospel. And the only way you're going to do it good is if you really, really live the gospel, not the law. The law cannot save you. The law cannot help you unless you already have the gospel, folks. This is what I cannot seem to get through to people. I cannot seem to get through to other religions. I cannot seem to get through to even my own fellow pastors. I cannot seem to get through to them. We are not here as lawmakers. We are not here as rulers. We are not here as tyrants. It's my way or the highway, we don't know that. But we really are not here for that reason. I just, I can't get over it. And if Joseph Smith would have grown up in a place where there was the gospel, the free, beautiful, wonderful gospel, salvation by grace alone through faith in Jesus Christ, given through the means of grace and word and sacrament, if he had grown up with that, Romanism would not have been. But instead, he grew up in a place called, you know what it was called? I'll tell you what it was called. It was called the Burned Over Area. That's what it was called. It was a part of New England and Western New York and down into Pennsylvania and Ohio even. That was called the Burned Over Area. Why? Because preachers were in that area preaching nothing but fire and brimstone. Preaching the ever-loving, scaring the ever-loving wits out of people. Really, I mean, you have no idea. Go online sometime and find some of these sermons. The most famous one is called, what's it called? Falling into the Hands of a Fearful God. Something like that. That's the most famous one. That was preached, and that guy preached that all up and down the East Coast and everywhere, Appalachia and everywhere, and scared the bejeebers out of everywhere. And yeah, in some places, it did revive the church. It did cause people to behave a little better. But in a lot of places, the church was emptied out. Because people didn't want to go to church on Sunday to be yelled at. Okay? Somebody says to me this morning, how come you preach just as passionately for 10 people as you do for 100 people? Real simple. I get paid the same no matter what. Okay? But also it's really simple because everybody needs to hear the gospel, right? It doesn't matter how many people there are. If there's 2 people or 3 people, they need to hear the gospel just as much as 25 people, right? I mean, I could have come out this morning and said, I could have stopped you halfway through the first hymn, you guys, and I could have said really easy, look, if you're not going to sing and if you're not going to speak up, we're going to just quit and go home. Right? I could have. I know plenty of my brothers would have done that. Right? Come on, what's the matter with you people? What are you, embarrassed to say the Nicene Creed? Huh? But I know that very few people are big mouths like me. Very few people like to stand up and speak. And hey, there's a microphone there for you. I don't need a stinking microphone. Really? I mean, I know that. So what am I going to do? Stand up there and yell at you? And make the whole sermon about the law and how you ought to behave and how you ought to speak out for Jesus and all this kind of stuff and make you slink out of there like you could close the door and you could go underneath the door jamb? No, that's what created Joseph Smith. That's exactly what created Joseph Smith. So yeah, it's when people are scared. And I mean really scared. And I mean they feel the flickering flames of hell on their feet. They'll believe anything. Absolutely anything. So that's
Power of the politician.
No, power corrupts, right? We don't know that. Laura had a question.
Doing someone the other day, and do you think that the Gospels were originally written in Hebrew and translated into Greek?
No.
Can you explain why you think that? I mean, most
I
of the
could.
people reading are going to be in Hebrews, correct? Would they not need to read it in Hebrew?
No.
The letters?
No. The common Jew at the time of Jesus did not speak Hebrew every day. They spoke it in the synagogue. They spoke it in the temple maybe. The average Jew in Jesus' day spoke Aramaic, which is a cross between Arabic and Hebrew. right? And for business, for selling fish, or most other commodities, they use Greek. So their language in their home would be Aramaic, their language at synagogue would be Hebrew, but their everyday language out on the street would be Greek. What's called Koine Greek, which is it's comparable to what we call Boulder Latin, the Latin of the Vulgate Bible. The Greek that they spoke was comparable to that. It was the common, everyday, run-of-the-mill Greek. It wasn't poetic Greek like Homer, for example. To write something that's going to be read all over, when churches in Asia Minor, churches in Spain, churches in Italy, churches in North Africa, you would absolutely, positively write it in Greek, not Aramaic, or Arabic, or Hebrew. What difference does it?
Some of the gospel written in Hebrew.
No, some of the Old Testament is written in Aramaic. A chunk of Daniel and Ezekiel are both written in Aramaic. But no part of the Gospels is written in Hebrew, that I know of. No, not even the book of Hebrews. Okay? As far as I know, all the manuscripts that we have of the New Testament are in Greek. Now, there's many different kinds of Greek because the language changed over the centuries. And so you have some, let's say, in all capital letters, you have some in all small letters, you have some written in cursive style, you have some written in block style, and so on and so forth. But as far as I know, and I maybe missed something, but as far as I know, there are no texts of the New Testament in Hebrew. Until you get to a time where Jews are converted to Christianity, which really isn't until the 1800s. And then you can get a Hebrew Bible today with the New Testament in Hebrew. But that's unpointed text, which only citizens of Israel pretty much. What's it?
I think it's certainly about one. Whatever rule there was destroying all of the Hebrew and making sure it was all Greek.
He's trying to sell you something. He's trying to sell you on some. He's either a Seventh-day Adventist or an Armstrong High or some other kind of kooky religion. Yeah, he's trying to sell you on something. That's like the guys come around and say, well, the Pope invented Sunday. And he got all kinds of reasons, all kinds of concocted history. And, oh, yeah, see, the Pope created Sunday. And they used to go to church on Saturday. People say stuff like that, it ain't true, first of all. And second of all, he's weary of people who say something like that because your question should right away be, so what difference does it make? It really is. I mean, it could certainly possible that well, I don't know about Luke. Luke probably didn't speak Hebrew probably real well. If he was a convert to Judaism, I don't know. I don't think so. But Mark certainly could have written his gospel in Hebrew or Aramaic. Matthew could have in Hebrew or Aramaic. John could have. We know John didn't because he wrote his in 100 AD. By that time, Hebrew was pretty much outlawed. Mark could have done that. Well, again,
about somebody that was doing this and wondering.
I would just ask the question. Okay, so what's the point? No, I don't get the point. And again, I don't think that happens.
But this is possibly some of them translated correctly.
Okay. So there's that happens all the time anyway.
That's it. I mean, we got Bibles today.
Oh, yeah.
We got there's a Bible right here.
NASB is the best, but it ain't perfect. In a lot of places, if I was to do my own, if every pastor was to do their own translation, we'd have 1,500 translations.
Right.
We almost had that many anyway. Bruce?
Now, is the Apocrypha also in Greek?
Yes and no.
Okay, so that's also.
A lot of the Apocrypha was the only samples we have, the only examples that we have are Greek, except for the Dead Sea Scrolls. Some of the Apocrypha is in the Dead Sea Scrolls, and that's in Hebrew.
And then.
Or Aramaic,
Okay.
either one. All right, Islam.
Thank you.
You're welcome. Islam. All right, let's start out by saying Islam means submit, submission. Okay, I added or else. Because really that's what it comes down to. This is, in our series, the first, to insist on conversion. You may notice, or remember from Buddhism and Hinduism, Buddhism and Hinduism grows like a weed. It never stops growing. It grows and grows and grows and grows. But it doesn't have any evangelists. It doesn't have any missionaries. It doesn't do any outreach. It really doesn't. I mean, it's very rare. You know, you had the Krishnas there in the 70s. I suppose you could call them kind of missionaries or evangelists, but they were very good at it, first of all. And second of all, I don't know that that's what they're really trying to do to get you to join something. And one of the reasons is because Hindus and Buddhists don't have what we would call denominations or organizations or even congregations. People will get together and build a temple. They will get together and build a shrine. They will get together and build something where they can go and meditate, or they can go and sacrifice, or they can go and worship in some way, or whatever. But they don't have congregations in the same sense that we have them, and synods or denominations or anything like the same sense we do. And so they really have no incentive. There's nothing that says, hey, you know, if we don't get more offerings to the headquarters, we have to go out of business. See, that's the thing behind Christian denominations. Christian denominations have headquarters, and headquarters have staff, and it's full-time staff. They're not out preaching and teaching. They're counting paper clips, sharpening pencils, doing copies and mailings, etc. Right? That's what they're doing, and they get paid pretty good. As a matter of fact, they get paid better than most pastors. And so you need to support them. Well, they don't support themselves by going out preaching and teaching. They don't do that. They, punch the clock 9 to 5, Monday through Friday, and they got to be supported. Well, they got an office to sit in. They got to have an office, have to have a chair, have to have a desk, have to have a telephone, right? Have to have a copy machine, have to have lights. Ceiling would be nice. Walls come in handy. Heater, air conditioner, okay? Maybe a little garden out back to have your sack lunch, or cafeteria, even better, to have a hot meal. See, the headquarters got to have all that stuff, and that costs money. And so they got to get offerings from their congregation, okay? And they can't do that if their congregations all die. If there's no new people going into the congregations. If the congregations all shrink down to nothing, then there's no money to send to headquarters. And then the headquarters can't exist. Okay? Now, you're going to say to me, Pastor, that's very cynical. Yes, it is. Aren't people out missionizing and outreaching because Jesus said, go and teach all nations? Isn't that why they're doing that? Some of them, yeah, I would say that. And hallelujah for them. Good for them. All right? That's great. That's wonderful. But the vast majority of my peers in the ministry, right, and they bemoan not so much the loss of souls as they bemoan the small number. Right? I didn't have any conversions. I didn't have any converts. I didn't have any confirmations this year. I just can't seem to grow. And other guys going, 2,900, 400, 6,042 conversions this year. Right. Good. Learn from me. Okay? So, if they're so interested in just getting souls to heaven, why are they so talkative about their numbers? Methinks they protest too much. So anyway, yeah. Islam, however, is the first one that we come to where conversion is absolutely essential. You either convert or you pay a big price, literally in money or in life, one or the other. There is no free ride. Understand that first of all. The object, the goal of Islam is every human being on the planet, either a Muslim or paying the price of not being a Muslim. Every single one, no exception. That is their goal. And there is no moral or ethical restriction on how that may be obtained. Okay? Because the law does not apply to y'all. Islamic law, nor any other kind of law, applies to unbelievers, to infidel dogs, which is what you are. The law does not apply to you. You can be killed, you can be beat up, you can be raped, you can be imprisoned, you can be enslaved, you can be, you name it. Anything in the world can be done to you. There's no law against it. Because the law does not apply to you. You can be lied to. They'll lie right to your face. And it's no big deal. They better not lie to each other. That's a big deal. But they can lie to anybody else. Right? If they're wrong. Yeah. Islam means submission. A Muslim is one who submits. However, there is considerable evidence that this Arabic word originally referred to the attribute of manliness and was merely used to describe a man who was heroic and brave in battle. You have to understand something. Islam does not really come into much of an existence until after 600. Okay? And we'll come to a date in a minute, an actual date. But so 600 years, all right? 600 years from Jesus. That's pretty late, all right? So the Arabic world has been around a lot longer than that. And the Arab tribes, they go back 2,000 years before Christ. And the Arab language has been around a long time, and Arab customs, and Arab beliefs, and traditions, and all that kind of stuff has been around a long time. And so this word Muslim, or Islam, okay, has been around a long time before Muhammad was even born. And it had an original meaning. And the original meaning, I'm saying right here, is manliness. Okay? We would say macho. Only during and after the time of Muhammad did the word attain its current meaning. Indeed, although Islam is now a worldwide religion, it can best be understood and explained in the context of pre-6th and 7th century Arab culture. So you really have to understand Arab culture from 2000 BC to about 500 to 600 AD in order to really understand what's going on. This is why I think the Muslim religion, the Islam religion, is fairly easy to pick up if you're African, if you're Asian, Indian, Chinese, Indonesian, Malaysian, any of those things. It's a little harder to pick up for Western Europeans and for Americans, South and North Americans, because of the cultural problem, the cultural dissonance, let's say. It's just a little harder for them to reach out to them. We think of many of these things that those other societies were much, they are East, okay? You know what Kipling said, right? Kipling wrote, "The East is East, and the West is West, and never the twain shall meet." Okay? What is he talking about? This is exactly what he's talking about. Okay, the Western Hemisphere, which is basically the North and South American continents, and part of Europe, even though not geographically, but still is. That's the West. When we talk about the West, that's what we're talking about. We're talking about everything. I guess nowadays you would have to include maybe Hungary and Romania and those countries that were in Eastern Europe, but they used to be communist. But I don't know about that. It's kind of a fuzzy area right now. But certainly from Austria and Germany, Switzerland, Italy, there, all the way to Hawaii. Okay, that's the West. And from those nations to Japan and Australia, well, Japan, I guess Australia would be West also. That's East. And so the Eastern cultures, the Oriental cultures, if you want to use that term, the Asian culture, if you want to use that term, also including Africa, tend to, their cultures, their societies, their traditions, their customs tend to be pretty much the same. Or if not the same, at least in general, they have the same kinds of ideas. Whereas in the West, that was true, they had the same ideas, but their ideas, because of the Renaissance and the Enlightenment, changed considerably. And so we have a different way of looking at things than we used to, say, 1,000 years ago. I don't know that there was a lot of difference 1,000 years ago or 1,500 years ago, but there's a lot of difference now. So that's something you need to know. The fact that only acceptable version of the Quran is in Arabic. By only acceptable, I mean if you quote the Quran to a Muslim and you quote in any other language but Arabic, they will say to you, well, that doesn't count. If you try to prove to them, for example, that they shouldn't be killing infidels, there's plenty of passages in the Quran that say that. Okay, the Quran contradicts itself thousands of times, literally. But if you, infidel dog, were to quote the Quran against a Muslim to show them that their book is contradictory, they'll blow you off. Doesn't matter because you don't speak Arabic. It would be as though I would tell you that this is not the Bible. That the Bible is the Greek and Hebrew text I have in my office. And if you can't read that, then you're not a Christian. That's the same thing. See? So you can imagine that it's hard to argue with a Muslim. Right? I get flyers every once in a while from Christian groups saying you can evangelize Muslims, and I chuckle when I read through them because nowhere in there do they say you need to learn Arabic, but you really should. Otherwise, you ain't going to get anywhere. It must also always be recited aloud in Arabic. No whisperers allowed in Islam. If this was a mosque and this was Friday prayers, and y'all were going through the liturgy the way you did it this morning, those of you who were here, you'd be thrown out. Literally. The doorkeeper, which is kind of like a guard, he would tap you on the shoulder and you'd have to pick up your shoes and leave. If you ever walk by a mosque, okay, there's a couple of them in Tucson, walk by a mosque on Friday, okay, and listen. It's a cacophony of people talking like this. That's exactly the way they do it. Everybody. And if you don't, you're a wimp. You'd be drummed out. Yeah. Because that's the only way Allah will listen. If you speak strongly and firmly and with conviction. None of this whipping out stuff. No. None of this mumbling. No. No whispering. Not allowed. Allah don't like that. You be told that right off. Also, a Muslim must always pray toward Mecca in Arabia. This clearly illustrates the very strong cultural bias. There are many other parts of the religion which also tie very closely to Arab culture. Islam is therefore a very Arab phenomenon, which over the past 1,300 years has taken on worldwide significance. Muhammad was born AD 570. Well, look at that, 500 years of Christianity in Arabia. And yes, Arabia was Christian. The whole area was Christian. Okay? Egypt was Christian. North Africa was Christian. All of Arabia was Christian, 500 AD. All of Mesopotamia was Christian. All of Turkey was Christian. All of Greece, all of Rome, all of Europe, all of Gaul, all the way up to Britain. Okay? Wherever the Roman Empire was, it was Christian. Russia was also Christian by this time, most of it. Ukraine was Christian. The steppes were being converted right along. The Cossacks were coming to Christianity, slowly but surely. So, the whole world had been Christian for 500 years, folks. This country, less than 300 years old. When you think of how long that is. He was born into the Quraysh tribe of the Hashim family. His original name was Abul Qasim. His father's name was Abd Allah. Isn't that interesting? Yeah. His father died before he was born, and his mother, Amina, when he was 6. That is, when Muhammad was 6. He went to live with his grandfather, who then died when he was 8. The poor guy had a rough childhood. Let's admit that. Okay. He was then sent to a rich uncle, Ubayd Allah, and finally to a poor middle-class uncle. Thus he was raised by this uncle, Abu Talib. You'll hear more about Abu Talib later, who operated caravans across the desert. Ubal, or Muhammad, accompanied many of the uncle's caravans and visited many different cities, meeting many different kinds of people and religions. He became a member of the religious sect called the Hunafa, or Seekers. When he was 25, through his uncle, he met a rich widow, Khadijah, 15 years older than he, for whom he began to work. They were soon married. They had 2 sons, both of which died, and 4 daughters. Ubul began to work less and less and contemplate more and more, often going to caves around Mecca to meditate. In other words, this guy found himself a nice rich widow. He didn't have to work no more. He didn't have to go on caravans anymore, tote that barge, lift that bale, didn't have to do that no more. And rich widow was going to take care of him, and she basically bankrolls him quite a bit. And so he's got time. And of course, there's no NFL in those days, and no video games or whatever, and no streams to fish in the desert. So no deer to hunt. So what's he going to do? Well, I know, let's go walking. And so he walks in the heat of the desert. And he walks and he finds, of course, some shade. Finds shade in caves. There's a lot of caves there. And so he goes in these caves and he's got nothing else to do, so he kind of meditates. Now, the guy's illiterate. He cannot read or write. But he's going by all what he hears. And on the caravans, by the way, the caravan route, as far as we know, the caravan route went across the Arabian Peninsula down here and went over here so he was familiar with Babylon, he was familiar with Damascus, he was familiar with Jerusalem, and with Memphis and Cairo and all that. He was familiar with all those. And so the caravans would also go to smaller places and more exotic countries and things like that. And while those areas were Christian in the sense of their kings or governments or whatever were Christian, a lot of the people had side religions. It's kind of like in Mexico, you know this, that the Roman Indians, the Roman Catholic people in Mexico that live up in the hills, the Yaquis, and what used to be Aztecs, they have taken their own religion and mixed it together with Romanism. So there's kind of 2. Or if you go in the Caribbean nations, Romanism exists side by side with Voodooism. And they kind of coexist together, and they even kind of mix a little bit. That's the way it was. That's the way it was in a lot of places. Over these 500 years, the Christian church was embroiled throughout this period of time in all kinds of controversies. They were embroiled in controversies of leadership. They were embroiled in controversies of theology. The Trinity was a big one, wasn't settled for hundreds of years. The 2 natures of Christ really wasn't settled for a long time. which book should be in the Bible. Really wasn't settled for a long time. So a lot of this wasn't really settled until around 600. Also in 600 you have what is clearly the first pope. And in other words, the Roman bishop starts to kind of take over. Before that, there was a lot of struggle between him and the guy in Constantinople, and really the guy in Damascus and in Cairo, in Egypt, in Alexandria, and in Carthage. So there were really 5 centers of Christianity, okay, and they all claimed to be superior to one another. So what you've got going on in this part of the world, okay, is that the churches, the actual preachers, the pastors, the priests, okay, who are in charge, responsible for the souls of the people, they're not paying a whole lot of attention. It's kind of like what I was talking about with Joseph Smith and the East Coast during the 1820s and 30s. The people were kind of ignored. I mean, you went to worship in those days, and yeah, you participated, but it was, I don't know, it was robotic, I guess is the best word to throw at it. And you didn't really participate all that much. It was more a watching thing, especially in the East. It was more a watching thing. You watched the liturgy. You really didn't participate in it. Okay?
Like you're watching a show.
Yeah. If you go to Eastern Orthodox Church today, you will see this. They have some participation, but not very much. And used to be, until very recently, didn't have any at all. It used to be pretty much if you went to an Eastern Orthodox service, you were watching the liturgy of, what's the guy's name? Hippolytus, Saint Hippolytus. We were watching the liturgy unchanged since the 2nd or 3rd century. Unchanged. And it would take a good 2 hours. And you watched it. And when it came time for communion, that was your participation. That only changed in the last 100, 150 years, mostly in Western Orthodox churches. It's still that way in a lot of places in the East, like in Ukraine and Russia. Doesn't seem to bother them all that much. Doesn't seem to bother them. And it really didn't bother these people. Nobody objected. There was no reformation. But their souls were not being fed, let's put it that way. There was so much controversy going on. There were so many debates. There were so many councils arguing over points of doctrine that should have been settled long before, but people were stubborn. That a lot of these heresies and all these false doctrines got spread around a lot. And so Muhammad picked up on all this. He also picked up on listening to the Gnostic gospel, which were, in some cases, very blasphemous stories about Jesus and the apostles. He would have heard about Jesus, for example, being married. He would have heard about Mary, perhaps conceiving Jesus with a Roman soldier, rather than Jesus being conceived by the Holy Spirit. He would have heard a story like that. Okay? All of these stories that he heard found their way eventually into the Quran, or into the Hadith, which is the other holy book, one of the holy books, which we'll talk about in a minute. For next time, maybe. But I'm trying to get you to understand the scene here, okay? Setting the scene. You've got this guy, again, uneducated, never went to school, did not read or write, only heard lots and lots and lots of religious stories. And now he's unemployed, but living fine, living off his widowed bride, 15 years older than he, and wandering around in dark caves and meditating. What good do you suppose is going to come from that? One night in 610, he began having visions that the angel Gabriel was speaking to him. These revelations became the Quran. There are 4 conflicting versions of Muhammad's call to be a prophet. And I give you the listing there. If you ever want to pick up a Quran, I have one in my office. I think there used to be one in here. I think that borrowed and never got back.
Can you get one in English?
Yeah, you can get one in English. But again, if you're talking to a Muslim, understand that they'll just say, that's nothing.
Right.
But for you, but for us to understand what's being said, at least.
And isn't one in English, aberration, the Allah?
Just being in English?
Yes.
I don't know about that.
Okay. One of my friends is Islamic, and I said, well, can that borrow your Quran? Sometimes just to read it, he goes, not in Arabic. I said, we're going to get an English one. He goes, no, you shouldn't have that.
Yeah, they would say that. Yeah. That's normal.
I mean, Super Next guy, he never lied.
That's a normal response, though.
Yeah.
Depending on which account is correct, either Allah appeared personally to Muhammad, or the Holy Spirit gave him these revelations, or angels announced God's call to him, or Gabriel appears to him and hands him the Quran as a complete text. That's a favorite for some. They like that. Because again, Muhammad was illiterate. He could not read or write. And so how does Muhammad be the author of the Quran if he can't write? That's a little bit of a problem. So a lot of Muslims like the idea that Gabriel just said, here's the Quran, already done. After receiving his call, Muhammad began to doubt his sanity. Good call, Muhammad! He was also afraid that perhaps he had been possessed by a demon. Ooh, good thought, go with that. He became so depressed that he decided to commit suicide. Yes! However, another vision occurred and changed his mind. Bummer. Man, we were so close, huh? Getting rid of these folks. Mecca is an important religious center. Indeed, next to trading, its main business was and still is religion. The Kaaba is there. It's Arabic for cube. That's all. Doesn't mean there's no holy name or anything. The Kaaba, or most English people just say Kaaba, but it's Kaaba. There's 3 syllables. In heaven and set directly beneath it. So in Muslim mind, the Kaaba in Mecca, right, is geographically underneath heaven. And heaven above it is, depending on who you talk to, anywhere from 3 to 7 to 10 to 12 times the size of this Kaaba. Let's see, built by Adam, and the only building to survive the Great Flood. Repaired by Abraham and Ishmael, it is supposed to be an exact copy right in the city where we live. The Kaaba contains the black stone, which fell from the sky sometime in antiquity, most likely an asteroid, and said to have originally been white, but turned black by the sins of mankind. That's that old Arab tale. In Abul's day, in Muhammad's day, the Kaaba contained 360 gods. While the number of gods in the Kaaba is not mentioned in the Quran, this information is found in the Hadith, and I'll give you a reference in case you want to look it up. You can find any of these books online. You can just Google it and get it on Amazon if you want to. Of all the religions practiced in Mecca at the time, that of the Sabaeans was the most dominant. Theirs was a religion centered on, get this is important, sun, moon, and stars. Now, this is important, folks. Pay real attention to this paragraph. This is really important for you to understand Islam. The moon, not the sun. Modern Muslims tell you it's the sun, but they are wrong. In the original Sabaean religion that Muhammad took off of, it is the moon that is the male deity, and sun is female, not the other way around. Today, every Muslim will tell you the other way around. That's not true. That is a lie. And you can prove it simply by looking on top of their mosque, because guess what? There's not a sun on top of their mosque. It's a moon. That's right. All right. We're going to follow on here. The sun, the female deity. Together they produce the stars. Oh, isn't that nice? Which were still other deities. The Sabaeans used the lunar calendar and marked the beginning and end of months by the crescent moon. So they didn't use a new moon or a full moon. They used the crescent moon. I don't know how crescent. Most people I talk to say it would be comparable to what we today call the Cheshire moon. You know what the Cheshire moon is? Looks like the Cheshire cat from Alice in Wonderland. No. So not a tiny sliver, but not a big chunk either, right in between. I forget what they call it. There's a name for that.
Well, there's different phases.
Yes, there's a name for that particular phase, and I can't remember what it is. But anyway, that's the one that they key in on. That was the beginning and end of their months. They set aside a full month for fasting during the day and taught that all Arabs should make a pilgrimage to Mecca to worship at the Kaaba, kiss the black stone, and run to Wadi Mina to throw stones at the devil. All these things, folks, are part and parcel of the requirements in Islam today. That's why I say that Muhammad basically just took the Sabian traditional tribal religion and turned that into Islam. They also believed in giving alms and condemned usury. These beliefs later became central parts of Islam. Gabriel told Abul to change his name to Muhammad, which means praiseworthy. So now you know what Muhammad means. Muhammad in Arabic means praiseworthy. And preach against all other different gods of the Kaaba, which he called idols. He was told there only one true God, Allah. Allah was known long before Muhammad was born. The word Allah comes from two Arabic words, al, the definite article. You all know what definite article is? It's the word the. So the definite article the, and ilah, a word for God. This God was worshipped in and around Mecca and from very ancient times, going back as far as the days of the Babylonian Empire, 600 years before Christ. Allah was the personal name of the moon god and was one of the high gods among all those enshrined in the Kaaba. Allah was married to the sun goddess and had 3 children, the daughters of Allah, Alat, Aluzza, and Manat. The symbol of the worship of the moon god and his family of gods was the sign of the crescent moon. The Quraysh tribe, into which Muhammad was born, was particularly devoted to the worship of Allah and his 3 daughters, as can be seen in the names of Muhammad's father and mother. That's why I pointed it out. Indeed, worship of the moon god was extensive throughout the region known as the Fertile Crescent. From Persia to Babylon to Assyria to Canaan to Egypt, this god was one of the most important of chief gods. This helps explain why Islam was so warmly received by the peoples of these lands from the very beginning. This also completely puts to rest the Muslim claim that Allah is simply another name for God of Hebrews and Christians of the Old and New Testaments. Nothing could be further from the truth. This is what they try and sell you. Okay? They try and sell you that, oh, well, that's what Abraham called God. And Joseph and Jacob and all the rest of them. No, they didn't. It's true, the word El in Hebrew means God. And Elohim means gods, plural. Elohim is a name used in Hebrew for God very often. That's true. Right? But to say that the two are the same is ridiculous. You could make a case that the ancient Hebrews would worship the God, but it would more likely be translated as the Lord, or the Lord God, Elohim Adonai, or Adonai Eleh, or something along those lines, okay? Rather than simply El. In Hebrew, Allah would be El, or the God. I don't know of any Hebrew scriptures that refer to God in that way. So this is a big fat lie. But it's to be expected. These guys are liars to begin with. To credit, it is to his credit, Muhammad also preached against the rampant immorality of various kinds and so prevalent in that it was a hotbed of immorality of all kinds, especially sexual. For more than 10 years, Muhammad tried to persuade the people to adopt his new religion, but without much success. After 10 years, he had only 39 followers, and he and they were being constantly persecuted. In fact, both his wife and his uncle deserted him and refused to accept his new religion. That's a fact. The guy's old wife said, "Get out of here. And his uncle and his wife threw him out of the house. Get out of here. You're a bum. We don't like your new religion. Let's see. To try and appease his family, the rest of the city, the Quran describes in Surah 53 how Muhammad was tempted to declare that it was perfectly proper to continue to pray to and worship the daughters of Allah. So he compromised. Okay, there's no God but Allah, and Muhammad is his prophet. Yeah, well, you can also throw in the 3 daughters. That's okay. These are the infamous satanic verses of Islam. I bet you always wondered what that was. You know, the satanic verses. These have been since expunged from the Quran, of course, and the event is totally denied by most Muslims today. It was this incident that author Salman Rushdie wrote of and led to his condemnation and sentence of death yet to be carried out so far. So, back in the, I think it was 80s, maybe 90s, Salman Rushdie wrote a book called The Satanic Verses, and it was the story of how these verses, well, it was the story of these verses, really, and the surrounding events, but then later, how these verses were later expunged from the Quran, how old ancient copies have them, modern copies do not have them, and all that. And for doing that, for revealing this to us infidel dogs, a death sentence was put on his head by the Ayatollah Khomeini back in 80 something. 80, somewhere around there. Anyway, and he's in hiding to this day. Man has been in hiding about 30 years. And anytime he comes out to do a talk show now and then somewhere. Anytime he comes out, he can be killed by anyone. At any time. And this will be a great honor and praise to Allah, according to Muslims. But that's now you know what the satanic verses are. That in other words, here's an example of Muhammad being a compromiser, a cheat, a wimp, whatever. And it's very embarrassing to Islam, obviously. And so they don't want nobody to know it. It would be like taking the story of David and Bathsheba out of the Bible. We don't want people to know this. This is bad. This makes us look bad. Or the story of St. Paul persecuting the church. We'll take that out. We'll expunge that. Or Peter kowtowing to the Judaizers in the book of Galatians. The Bible has plenty, and those are just ones at the top of my head. The Bible has plenty of very embarrassing stories. Right? I mean, it does. Our heroes, quote unquote heroes, all have clay feet, except for Jesus, of course. So Muhammad and his fellow followers, a few followers, left Mecca and moved to the tiny village of Yathrib, 200 miles to the northeast. Yathrib welcomed Muhammad and asked him to mediate their many complex disputes, which he did so well that he began to gain a large following. The village soon became known as the city of the Prophet, or Medina. So in Saudi Arabia, you have Mecca and Medina. Mecca is the place for the Kaaba. Medina is the home of the Prophet, or house or city of the Prophet. The city that finally accepted him. Again, and his journey from Mecca to Medina is the start point of their calendar. Okay? Their calendar does not begin with the birth of Muhammad. Can I put the word in here? That's pretty funny. Where did I put that? Oh. That's really odd. Because that's kind of an important thing. Wow. How could I have left that out?
So it's the date he headed out towards Medina?
Yeah, the journey, yes, the journey itself. Huh. Because I would point you to that place at this point. Why didn't I do that? That is really hilarious. I am sorry, guys. That just really blows my mind that I forgot that. Why would I have forgotten it? Wow. Should be in this historical portion right here. What is followers? I'm sorry. Wow. And I don't know, I can't remember right now how it's spelled.
And what is it? Muraham?
No,
Or the Duhal?
no, I hear, I know it is to me. Hang on a minute. Yeah, I'll just do just in case. The trouble is, I don't know, in Arabic, G's and J's always get me. Higaira or Hijira. It's either a G or a J.
It's Hijiri is what I'm seeing.
R what?
H-I-J.
IRI is what I have.
Really? I've never seen an I in it, but could be. But yeah, Hagairi, whatever, Higaira means journey. And so it's the journey from Mecca to Medina, what is now Medina. That is year one of the Islamic calendar. Boy, somehow that sentence did not get put in there at that point. Weird. Anyway, without him, if at that point when he was thrown out of the house, if he just said, never mind, forget it, there would be no Islam. So without his journey to Mecca, and really without Meccas or Yathribs, without the village accepting him and elevating him to their judge, basically, their prince of justice of the peace kind of person, there would be no Islam. So to them, that's why it's year one, because without that, you don't got a religion. Okay? Muhammad soon decided to return to Mecca to try again to convert the city. Notice this, please. Please notice this. By force, if necessary. He began a series of raids. These were military raids. Okay? These were violent raids. These raids took lives. These raids destroyed property. This was a violent thing. Okay? Please note that. Right? Against Mecca's caravans, which in turn led to pitched battles. So Mecca raised its forces, Medina raised its forces more, and you had battles. He won the first battle and a few others, but he also lost a number of battles, nearly being killed on one occasion. And another, Medina was surrounded and almost conquered. So there were a lot of opportunities here for Islam to go bye-bye as a religion. Yes? Yes, exactly. Exactly.
Because I would think if I would talk to this to my Muslim friends, he would say, well, that's proof that God
Exactly.
Islam is
Right. That is exactly correct. That is exactly correct. And I would say, again, folks, when the Christian church does not carry out its duty and responsibility correctly, when the Christian church besmirches or covers up or tries to change the gospel, or when the Christian church loses its focus on the gospel, in every case I have seen in the history of this world, but especially since the New Testament, God allows a thing like Islam to happen. Okay? The one exception, and it is a glaring exception when you stretch out history before you, especially the last 2,000 years. The one glaring exception, sticking out like a sore thumb, is the Reformation. In that case, God rose up a correction for the gospel and a new home for the gospel. But in every other case before that, every time the church went away from the gospel, or disparaged the gospel, or tried to change the gospel, or just didn't do its job, Muslims would arise, the Turks, the Ottomans would arise, Christians would fight amongst each other, like the 100 Years' War between England and France. The Pope would become very violent and whatever. You'd have the 30 Years' War also. You'd have all kinds, every other time, except 1517. 1517, Martin Luther said, I want to get the gospel back. And God allowed that to happen. But as soon as the Lutherans became legalistic, guess what happened? 30 Years' War. Just about wiped them off the map. So this is why I say to my brother pastors, be careful. Be very careful that you do not get into the position of trying to use the law to survive. Be careful that you do not get to the point where you start to throw mud up against the wall in legalistic terms, seeing what sticks in order to grow. Be very careful that you don't use the law to try to browbeat people into joining your church. Be very careful, because when you do stuff like that, it's when God steps in and cracks down. It's when God steps in and rises up a problem a lot worse than you think you have. I had a great example of this, right? And we'll pick it up in that point next week. I have a great example of this. You know what the politicians have been worried about for decades, right? Social Security, right? They've been worried about Social Security for decades. They're worried about running out of money. It's going to run out of money in 2050. It's going to run out of money then. It's going to run out of money then. Blah, blah, blah. And I thought to myself the other day, wouldn't it be ironic if the 350,000 people who have died in the United States from COVID since last March, let's say it gets to 500,000, just for the sake of argument. Let's say that the number of people who died gets to 500,000. And let's just say, for sake of argument, I don't know any of this. These are not facts, okay? This is just argumentation. Let's say also, for sake of argument, that 80% of those 500 million are either on Social Security or going to retire right away within the next few years. And then let's also, one more thing, let's say that by those 500,000 people not being there, or the 80% of those 500,000 people not being there, Social Security is saved for a whole other century. Right? You get my point? Okay? So, did we solve our problem? Yeah, we solved our problem. But what did it have? You killed 500,000 people. See? So, this is what I'm saying about the church, okay? Let's change our liturgy, let's change our worship, let's change our Bible translations, let's change all kinds of stuff, let's be friendly, let's be warm and fuzzy, let's have praise bands, let's have contemporary worship, let's do all of this stuff so that we can solve our problem, because our problem is we're dying. We don't have enough money to send to headquarters to keep putting stamps on envelopes and pay the people to do that. All right? And so let's do that to save us. And what if God finds another way to save us, but that's 10 times more painful? Right? You get my point? You get my drift?
Yes.
In other words, as my Polish mother-in-law used to say, Be very careful what you ask for. You might just get it. Let's close.
May the grace of our Lord and Savior Jesus Christ, the love of God, the Father, and the fellowship of the Holy Spirit, be abide with us all. Amen.
Thank